You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 30. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
Visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and more.
Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. Follow us on Twitter at codingblocks or Facebook at facebook.com/codingblocks, or head to www.codingblocks.net and you can find all our social links there at the top of the page. And with that, welcome to Coding Blocks. I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
All right, and so first let's start off with a little bit of news. We'll try to keep it short. We've gotten some feedback about that. So, Alan, you want to talk to us about algorithms?
Yeah, apparently I can't.
Wait, what?
What do you mean you can't?
No, you're taking a whole class for this.
Look, man, so I did the first week and a half of videos, like all in one night, and I got wrapped up in Meteor and React.js and literally just did not get back to the algorithm thing. So maybe at some point I'll get back to it, but apparently I'm going to fail this class. So,
I quit intentionally. After telling the internet that I was going to do it, I watched the first couple videos and decided that I didn't want to do it.
Oh, it was all theory and math and...
But you didn't even get through the first week.
Who,
Yeah,
me?
I didn't.
Oh, yeah, no, Joe quit. Because it wasn't code-centric. It was literally more...
What?
F of g of x up to n equal to f over n equal times
it was math.
g of x. Yeah.
It was straight up math. There was, and he even said he did not want to do any implementation code-wise. He wanted abstract thought and, being able to put these ideas into pseudocode that could be translated into any language. So it was not coding.
Yeah, man, it's not fun.
But I wanted to keep up with it, and fortunately, our buddy, Will Madison, Will. He's doing it. Like, he's following through like a champ.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So hopefully he'll give us some feedback here at the end.
He
of
is
it.
a champ, man. He is.
He is. Yeah, he sticks with it. But like I said,
right.
I found a shiny new toy, and I got sidetracked.
Yeah, man, you saw a squirrel and you went for it.
I did.
You're like a dog.
All right. So what you got, Outlaw?
Are you going to make it through this recording, or like midway through it, you're going to see something?
Oh, I can't guarantee you anything.
Well, so you guys left me in Atlanta all by myself. So I've actually like wandered out around and gone to a couple meetups. So there have been some really good meetups here in the Atlanta area, both on React.js, or at least those are the ones that I've gone to. And one of them was the premier meetup for specific to React.js, and then another one was just the JavaScript meetup where the topic was React.js, and they were both really good. The first one, the premier React.js meetup, it was focusing on unit testing your React.js, and the other one was just more of an introduction to React.js in general. But it was both good information. And the testing one, we'll have I'll include a link to that in the show notes. But there was some interesting verbiage around unit testing that I was actually kind of curious to see, like, if what you guys had if you'd heard of it or what you thought of it. Like, there was unit versus functional testing, which is okay. That's not so new. But white box versus black box testing.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, white box is like when you have the source code, right?
No. Well, at least not the way that it was defined within the confines of that meetup. They were defining that, think of black box testing as synonymous with functional testing, whereas white box testing was testing more the internal structures of your entire system under test.
Okay, so like white box has knowledge of the internal workings, and the black box is as if you were a third party almost.
Yeah, I guess that'd be a good way to put it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've never heard those terms for it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it described that way either, but yeah, it was really good. Like I said, I'll include a link to the slide presentation in the show notes. It was some good stuff.
Cool.
So, Oh, and there's another one that's coming up that ought to be really like. You should be excited about this one, Alan, because coming up at the 29th of this month, there's another JavaScript one on Meteor specific to gaming.
Yeah, I saw that in the show notes. I'm kind of curious about it because it doesn't seem to really fit the pattern that Meteor is. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll be there.
Well, that's what happens when you leave me in Atlanta. Like, I got to go find things.
Yeah, I understand.
You guys are both down in Florida now, so.
So that's kind of interesting though, because like I said, what kind of pulled me away from the algorithm class was I've been messing around with Meteor.js and React, and really the kind of what did it is I don't even remember what I was searching for one night, but I came across this article that this guy wrote about, hey, why you should use Meteor for your next project. And I ended up watching it, like I read all his bullet points and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. And he's like, watch this video if you don't believe it. And I watched this video. It might have been 7 minutes. But dude, like what they did in that 7 minutes blew my mind. It just coming from having done so many apps over the years, I was like, wow, this is really impressive. And so I kind of dove into it. And the interesting part is I ended up doing it with React. I have no idea why. I think maybe I saw another blog post and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to play with one, I'll play with them both. And I've actually had a lot of fun with it. Like I've literally been staying up every night past midnight messing around with Meteor.js and React.js. And I've got thoughts on it. I don't know if we want to go into them now. Maybe we'll do it on the next episode or something. But it's there's some really cool stuff to be had there.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about maybe in a future episode we talk more about it because, like, specific to React.js, right? Like one of the big to dos about it is the virtual DOM, right? And it's kind of like, well, why should I care about the virtual DOM? Like, why is that a thing, right?
Right.
But so I think maybe we could cover that in a future one.
Yeah,
there's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, we'll do it. I mean, I've actually had a lot of time to play around with both of them. And
was this video that blew your mind away? Was this like a Michael Bay production or something?
No,
it could have just been a lot of CGI.
No, nothing cool, right? It was literally just, hey, let me show you what Meteor can do, and just walk through quickly building an application that literally had like all the core pieces that you would need. It was pretty impressive. But
until I see it with my own eyes, it's CGI.
Along those same lines, though, one other thing I wanted to mention was with that, anytime you start making an app, you kind of want to start off with something that can bootstrap you, right? And that's why Bootstrap is so popular. And there's another one out there called Foundation. Well, I've always kind of rooted for the underdog. Like I've always wanted to, say, oh, okay, well, half the planet's using Bootstrap. Let me try Foundation, right? Man, I got in there messing with it, and it's got some nice things. But I was so disappointed at some of the things that were missing that I ended up scrapping Foundation and going back to Bootstrap. So, I don't know. A little frustrating. And if you haven't played with either of those things, we'll have links in the show notes for them. But, at any rate, just some cursory thoughts on that.
I mean, I always go with the winner. That's why I program in C#.
Wait, wouldn't you be in Java? Isn't that what like 90% of the world's using?
I got no time for losers. Second place is the first loser.
Yeah, no fear.
Sorry, Java. Just kidding.
Wow.
Not. All right. Anyway, reviews. So we got a couple of reviews. I'm sorry. I'm going to butcher your name probably. First is from a Swinner, who said this is the only podcast they listen to, which is cool. But there's some other good ones we can suggest.
No, but that's perfectly fine. We'll take that. That's incredible. Like, awesome. We're the only one he listens to. That's amazing.
Yeah. Also, we got one from Fleckism, which is awesome. So thank you very much. And, also on Twitter, I believe it was, Luke Warren mentioned he got his whole team of coworkers listening to the podcast, which is fantastic. So what up, team?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's awesome. Welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, somebody give that guy a medal.
Yeah, no doubt.
High five.
Now I told him to take it to the next level, he needs to get all those guys to leave us reviews. That would be amazing. So, also, awesome. Yeah, we sent out a thing on Twitter just kind of saying, hey, we're about to do a podcast on design patterns, and hey, what do you guys want to hear about? And Adam actually wrote us and said that he'd like to know about like parsing APIs using XML or JSON, why choose them, that kind of thing. So we'll add that to the stack of things that we want to talk about. And then Andre asked about ALM, which is alerting, logging, and monitoring. And that's something that we've all had quite a bit of experience with, and that could definitely span an episode or two. So we'll get that in the queue because I think that's something that everybody should know a little bit about. So.
And since we're on the topic of JavaScript frameworks, or have been talking about them so far, could one of you guys do me a favor and remind me to register for Connect.js?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to remind me.
But
Sure.
that's coming up. So if you're in the Atlanta area, or you want an excuse to travel to the Atlanta area, October 16th through the 17th, hint, hint, Joe.
Yeah.
There's some pretty good stuff. I mean, if you go and look at that conference, you can find it at connect-js.com.
Yeah, and there's some big names in that.
It sounds like it's going to be a very interesting conference. So, yeah, check it out. And then, so we started doing these surveys, and we've gotten some interesting results. And in our last episode, just as soon as we start it and we get this good path going, we forget to mention a survey. And so, I had to make one up. So since we didn't remember to mention it in the episode, I thought, well, obviously the survey for this one is, should this episode have a survey? Now, I'm assuming that you two haven't cheated.
I haven't
looked. You haven't looked at it.
I have not looked.
Not looked.
All right. So what do you, your choices are yes or no.
75% no.
75% no.
75% yes.
Okay. Well, Joe would be the winner then.
Really?
Ooh.
People like surveys.
It was 72% for yes.
Wow. All right,
So, well, I guess if you rounded that, it would be closer to 73%, but whatever.
Well, if the price is right, he would have won. Showcase Showdown.
Yeah.
Come on, people.
I'm just amazed that more than 4 people
No, because
voted.
he went over. He went over though, right?
No, but that's the thing. You always had to. No, you had to go under. Yeah, my bad. I was wrong.
Yeah, you had to stay under.
He lost.
But yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So I guess the audience likes surveys, because even the episode that we forgot to have a survey should have had a survey, which
that's
is
cool.
Coincidentally, it did have a survey, so it's a good thing that I put a survey on it, since everyone seemed to think that it should have one.
That's like 12 Monkeys or Pandora's Box or something.
Well, this is good. This is for science, so I feel like we've done the scientific community well by including that survey.
We have stats now.
So, in other news, and I debated on whether or not this one should be a survey, but I decided not to. GitHub has their Atom editor. I don't know if either of you have used it. And then Microsoft forked that and used it as the basis for the Visual Studio Code product that was discussed, I don't know how long ago, a couple months back. And so I've been playing with both and kind of comparing and contrast, just trying to get acclimated to both. And I wasn't sure, have you guys used either? What's your thoughts on one versus the other? Or do you have any opinions on it?
Haven't touched them. I've wanted to get into both of them, but I don't know. I guess I'm so used to Visual Studio and Sublime that those pretty much went out.
Yeah, I'm still really figuring out Sublime, which is sad.
So here's the thing then. So for anyone who's listening in that is a fan of either, I'd love to hear some of your take on either or both of them, because if you use both, for example, there's some little nuances between them, right? Visual Studio Code has a revert file option, but that option is dangerously close to the save all. So every time you click on save all, you almost feel like you want to say, whew, that was close.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I almost didn't make it, right? But so Atom doesn't have that feature, which is good. But then there's other little nuances too, Atom has tabbed, so like every time you open a file, you get a new tab for it, which is really cool, right? And especially if you're already coming from something like a Visual Studio or an IntelliJ
Or
right?
Sublime.
Yeah, like you're used to this, right? And I don't know why, but they took it out in code. It doesn't do that.
So you only have
that
one
feature.
file?
No, you can have, okay, so you can split screen your environment like you can in like a Visual Studio, for example, right? Like you can have, to split screen it and see multiples. But it's so annoying because in each one of those panes, you can only have one file. So as soon as you click on another file, well, you just
Blew away.
you just took away whatever one you were looking at.
So you can't have
And
more than 2 files at a time.
Yeah, so no, you can. You can keep splitting them off just like you can in like a Visual Studio or an IntelliJ.
But
right?
they're open. They're truly open at that point, right? Like you're seeing them all at the same time as opposed to, hey, this is my list of files open and let me switch between them.
Well, yeah, so like if you're like me, like I'll often have multiple files open that I'm working in, and I'll know that like, hey, one piece of something that I need is going to be in this file, and another part's going to be in another file. And I might not be actively looking at that. It might not be one of the tabs that are actively open at the time, but I know that it's there, and I can easily go back to it, right? Whereas now, working in code, you don't have that option. But what you do get is this other like little workspace scenario where like if you double click the file, then it comes up into your workspace area so that you can have a quick access to it from there. Because I should mention too that if like when you navigate files, it's automatically moving the equivalent of the Solution Explorer.
I like
right?
that.
It's automatically navigating to that next file. You say that, but it can be annoying if you only have like a couple files open, and all of a sudden you're like, well, where's that other file that I really needed? Oh, I forgot to double click it, so it gets in the workspace.
I'm going to
So
have to
there's some little
download and install it.
nuances.
Yeah, I need to
and
install it.
One last one, though, is that on the Atom side of the house, it is inundated with choices in the menus, right? Like if you start poking around in the menu systems, there's just all kinds of options there, right? Whereas in Visual Studio Code, they've pared that down. And I actually kind of liked that better. I thought that was a better experience than like, hey, here's everything under the sun.
So they chose the Eclipse route in Atom.
I don't know that I would quite word it that way, but I mean, like, there's definitely, if you start poking around the menus, you definitely get lost in the options quick. You can, right? And code is cleaner in that respect. So, like I said, I'd love to hear some feedback from like what others are doing with either or both editors. If you have a pro and con, why you chose one over the other. I'd love to hear some feedback on that.
Yeah, and you'll be able to do that if you're in a podcast player, like you're listening in your car or something. Just swipe over to the show notes thing, and at the very top, we're going to have a link to this episode. So it'll be codingblocks.net/episode 30. But you'll be able to click that and go up there and leave us a comment fairly quickly. So, with that, we did decide that we were going to do a survey this episode, a real one, and based off a LinkedIn question that I saw that I thought was pretty interesting, there seemed to be a lot of comments on this one question about whether you should spend your time learning frameworks or learning the underlying languages. So, for instance, would you learn React.js, or would you take the time learning just the core JavaScript language? Or would you take time learning Angular versus the JavaScript language, or whatever, right? So it's kind of
this survey isn't a survey. Like, this is a no-brainer. You got to learn the underlying technology.
I disagree. I've known plenty of people that have picked up frameworks and been able to look at existing code in the framework, because the framework is coded in a way that is usually better practices than somebody just coming off the street and writing some code, right? Because there's a lot of people collaborating on it, so you kind of get to pick up good practices that way. And I've actually known people that have picked up frameworks and been able to be productive and not be inundated with all the little nuances of the language, and they pick those up over time as
Yeah,
they
but I've
run.
also known people though that get in that situation and then all they know is the framework and they don't know anything outside of it.
And that's the argument, right? So the actual LinkedIn question was, hey, my team is working with Angular, but they're about to switch to React, and I'm nervous because, I don't even know Angular that well. Should I move over to this? And then, of course, as is the case with everything on the internet, people don't actually answer the immediate question. They, go off, hey, you don't need to learn just that. You need to learn JavaScript, you need to learn CSS, you need to learn HTML. That's pretty overwhelming, right? All in itself. So it was kind of curious. So, I'm wondering where people stand on that. Do you get extremely proficient at the underlying language before you go jump into any frameworks, or do you use the frameworks to help you learn as you go? I don't know. But I do agree because frameworks get eclipsed, right? Like they have a sunset on them.
A framework isn't going to tell you to use triple equal.
But you'll see it a lot in the code.
You'll see that in the examples.
But you
that's
won't
what
understand it.
I disagree, man. Like that's one of those things when you're reading through any kind of new language that you pick up. I mean, I don't know. A lot of times using somebody else's code as a guide is a lot of the way to learn something, right? So
Well, I guess we'll see what everybody responds back with, and
what's your take, Joe?
Then we'll have the science.
What's your take, Joe?
Of course, the answer is both, but I'm strangely on the side of learning the framework, actually. Because, I feel the same way. Like, you got to get stuff done, and I feel like learning through the lens of framework can be a good way to kind of dip your toe into the underlying technology while still getting stuff done. And as you keep seeing patterns or things like triple equal signs, eventually you're gonna get curious and Google them. So I feel like you'll learn the underlying soon enough.
Okay, so let me put it to you like this, okay?
You're not gonna convince me.
Yeah. So this one's specifically for Alan, but you know what, Joe? You're more than welcome to sign up for this too, because Coursera has a new class on React.js, or there's one on JavaScript. Now, which one are you going to pick?
React.js.
Oh man.
You would do core JavaScript? Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, like if you hadn't already done it, I was trying to make a joke. I don't know if Coursera actually has those classes.
No,
sure
but I mean,
They probably do.
But seriously,
else I will.
throw that away. Like, so here's my thing: if you were doing a resume, are people going to look at your resume if you just have JavaScript, or are they going to look at it and say, "Oh, this dude's doing React.js and AngularJS"? Right?
But we're not talking about a resume, though. We're talking about learning. So
Actually,
my point is that, like, if you had to start with something from scratch, you haven't touched it day one. Are you going to start learning the core principles of it, or are you going to dig into a framework? No, you should start learning the core principles of it first.
I think you pick it up along the way, though. I mean, that is honestly my opinion on it. I mean, a lot of people, they're more comfortable when they have the confines of something like a framework, and it gives them a little bit. Now, I would argue that Angular is probably not a good example of that because it's so deep, but a lot of times a framework gives you those guardrails to where you can kind of start.
So are you going to learn the good practices of C, or are you going to jump straight into the Unreal Engine?
Straight into
Unreal. I mean, because you want to accomplish something, right? I guess that's the difference. Like, people that want to learn a language, they're going to go learn that language. People that want to make something are going to say, hey, how can I make something the quickest way possible? And kind of start.
I think it's a recipe for disaster, though.
I don't know, man. Like I said, it'll be interesting. I'm definitely looking forward to this particular survey result. So
the survey will decide.
Yes, it will.
Like I said, it's science, so you can't argue with science.
So definitely also check out the show notes for that. We'll have a link for the survey up there. Definitely go up there and fill it out. We're really looking forward to this one.
Everybody help me prove Alan and Joe wrong.
Hey, also, while we're talking about kind of voting, I tweeted this out a while ago, and I thought it was kind of funny. Don't want to take too much time, but I was kind of thinking, I always like the idea of having like a programmer for president, and so it got me kind of thinking, like, well, which kind of, at least, tech luminary would I like to be president? Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Linus Torvalds, like which kind of famous programmer, Steve Wozniak, would you like to be president?
They all scare me.
Yeah, they're kind of known for being tyrants, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, like,
if Steve Jobs was president, it would be the best-looking White House you've ever seen.
but
right?
But you could only open the door one way. because he's not going to let you do it any other
But
way.
but coincidentally, you never realized it before, but that's the way you wanted to open the door anyways, so it kind of works out.
Right.
Now,
Bigger
if Bill
doors.
Gates is president, then the White House will work with everything. All the
Right.
way back to 300 years ago, it'll still work with all of that. Right?
And he's going to borrow from everything else. So you'll have the best of everything.
Yeah, it'll be really heavy, though, because it's carrying a lot of baggage with it. Right? And then if Linus is president, he's going to rebuild the whole thing from the bottom up, and it's going to work more efficient than anything you've ever seen.
And it'll be impossible
amazing.
to use.
And the whole world will adopt it.
And it'll be black and white.
So I got to vote Linus.
All right. I like it.
All right, so I guess on to the actual meat of the show today, and that is going to be design patterns. And so the one that I picked is the adapter pattern because I feel that it's fairly useful. So I guess first is just a bit of a question, what is it and what does it actually try to solve? So think about it like this. If you have a laptop and your laptop has an SD card slot on it, but you bought a camera that now has a mini SD, and then you have another device that has a micro SD. Well, you can't plug those things into it because you don't have a slot for it. So what do? You go out and buy an adapter so that you can plug up to your computer through a USB port or something, and then you can plug these various different cards into that adapter. Well, that's the same exact mentality behind programming an adapter. So just walking through kind of a small example, I think it'll help clear it up as far as software terms. And I'm borrowing some of this from Tutorials Point. We'll have a link on the show notes to the particular article, but I'm loosely going with it. So the one interesting thing about this that I've seen in almost every one of the implementations is there's almost like a mini factory pattern within all the adapters. And you'll find out why in just a minute. So, and I don't remember one of the shows we did factory patterns. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go back and listen to the episode, or we'll probably have another link on the show notes for that as well. But let's say that you have an audio player app, and let's say that this particular audio player has a class and it has one method in it called play, and that play takes in a file type and the file name because it needs to know what it is and where to go play it. And let's say that you now say, hey, my audio player is getting pretty popular. I want to bring in some other things. Right now it can only play MP3s, but I want to be able to play FLACs and MP4s as well. Okay, well, in order to do that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, so you pull in some third-party libraries, one that plays MP4s and one that plays FLACs. Well, those are going to have their own methods or API calls to play files. And let's say that the MP4 ones play MP4. It's not play like yours. And then the FLAC one has a play FLAC method. Well, what you could do is you could go into your play method and you could have put a bunch of if-else's in there so that every time that you add a new different type of file, you could just have if file type equal this and do this, if this, then do this. And so it really makes your core application a little bit cruddy. Like you have to go in and modify it every time. Then it's not easy to follow. It's no longer clean. So the way that you do this is you create an adapter. And so in this case, you might create something called a media adapter. And that media adapter would take in a file type, okay? When you call play, that is then going to have a private instance of a media adapter, we'll say. That media adapter could take in any type of file type. And so now you've got these FLACs and these MP4s. When that media adapter gets instantiated, it's going to go through and do that switch type thing. So it's what kind of does its own internal factory. So it's going to say if file type equal MP3, then create me a new instance of the MP3 player. If file type equal FLAC, create me a new instance of the FLAC player. If it equals MP4, create me a new instance of the MP4 player. And then it's going to know, hey, you called play, you need to play, or you need to hit the method on each one of those different classes that actually plays that file. And so really, in a simplified term, all you're doing is you're creating a bridge from your existing code that your particular application knows that it works with, in this case, play. And now you're creating an adapter so that it can hook into multiple different classes that maybe you don't know, maybe you do, but you don't want to have to change everything to work with your existing interface. So you create these adapters that will then kind of translate what that play means on all those other classes. So essentially that's all it is. It's very similar to using an adapter that you plug into something to where you can put multiple different things into it through the same interface. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much it.
So as long as you can play, you can play. But one thing I think is kind of interesting about this is that you do kind of have a dumbing down effect. Like, MP3s support this notion of bookmarks, but FLACs don't. So you're probably not going to have bookmarks in your, interface. And so if you do treat everything the same, then you have to stick to those commonalities.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one thing to point out too, though, it's usually on a method by method basis, right? Like when you're doing an adapter, it's typically for a specific piece of functionality. So what you just said, which was really interesting, is bookmarks, right? Like several of these file formats don't support it. But what you could do, if you wanted at that point, you could create your own layer for bookmarking on top of these things and then handle it yourself. And again,
Good
that's
point.
the same type of thing using an adapter that, yeah, the core FLAC library doesn't support bookmarks, but you could internally, because you created this adapter, and now you also set up this other layer of handling that behind the scenes. So, yeah, absolutely true. I mean, if you look at it purely from if you're trying to map everything one-to-one, then you're going to end up having to take the lowest common denominator. But really what the adapter pattern allows you to do is say, okay, my core interface or class supports these methods, and I need these to map to methods in these other classes out here. How do I do it? You create an adapter, basically a bridge from yours to theirs.
Well, I wouldn't talk about it as like one, though. Right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily talk about adapter patterns as like one-to-one, right? Like you would typically want, you have these two things or more, and you want them to all have a similar interface to them. And that's where you would use the adapter.
Yeah.
It's not trying to make this one, I forget exactly how you worded it a moment ago, but.
Well, no. When I said the one-to-one, I meant you're going to map this one method over here, like play, to some method over in another class. So when I say one-to-one, you're basically trying to get that same type functionality out of this third party or this other class that you're trying to adapt to yours, right? I didn't necessarily mean you're only going to ever have one adapter. What I'm saying is you're trying to map one piece of functionality to another. And it might be that your adapter has to call multiple things in that other class in order to accomplish what your play is, right? Like, let's say that
now you're getting into a gray area.
No, not really, because an adapter really is. You're trying to play that file. So a FLAC is it's basically a zipped up audio file. All right. So it may be that in that adapter to do play, you've got to call this unzip type function first and then
Convert
play.
to MP3 function.
See, I feel like you're about to step on my toes here with my boy Facade.
Okay, well, we won't step on the toes, but you see what I'm saying. I didn't mean one-to-one. I meant that you're trying to map the functionality of one to the other through a common interface. And by interface, we usually mean like the programming term interface, right? Like you're going to have a play.
Well, it doesn't have to be. I wouldn't phrase it as that.
Doesn't have to be.
Interface in this way could be much more of a generic term, not necessarily programming interface.
Fair enough.
But it's really cool when you think about, the audio example. If you've got a file and it can do all the basic audio stuff like fast forward, play, rewind, and once you get it going through that adapter, then you can probably do all the kind of other cool stuff, audio stuff you want to do, like equalizers, visualizations, all that stuff just work because it's dealing with that interface. And you don't have to do a bunch of ifs all throughout that code.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And the reason why I was joking about the facade pattern, though, is that it does kind of come up often about, like, adapter versus facade.
Yeah, I think they're very similar, and I mean, you're going to get into it here in a minute, but one's more about hiding ugliness, and the other one's more about linking two things together, right? Usually.
And we won't say which is which yet. I don't know why you got to call it ugly. It's just code.
Yeah, fair enough. I've definitely written some ugly code in my time. So... yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, it's got a pretty simple use, and really behind the scenes, it's not that difficult to do. I've got a couple of links, one for the tutorials point, and then there was another one on Code Project that I thought did a really nice job of bringing it all into like one block of code so that you can like quickly look down and see, oh, this is what it's doing. So it's pretty simple, straightforward, and useful stuff.
Cool.
All right, so the next thing is, if you haven't already, please go leave us a review. We've had like just a couple in the past month since we did our last episode. So please, if you've been on the fence about it and you just haven't taken the time to go up there and do it, please do it. It really does help us out. It helps us get us in front of more people and grow the audience. I mean, we want to make this a big thing so everybody can learn and have fun along the way. And if you have any friends or family that are programmers or aspiring to be programmers, or just like somewhat off humor on occasion, definitely send them over there and tell them to take a listen to the show.
I think what Alan's trying to say is that you should aspire to be like Luke and get the entire team listening to the show. And, even better if you can get the entire team to leave a review. That'd be awesome, too, because we greatly appreciate those.
Yeah, most excellent. This episode's being brought to you by Infragistics. Great apps happen by design. Build your application right from the start with rapid prototyping, UI controls, and the support you need to develop the ultimate experience. Head over to infragistics.com and start your free trial now.
All right, so quick recap. We just talked about the adapter pattern, which allows you to get two incompatible sets of code to talk together, and had some really cool examples there. And now we're moving on to the facade pattern.
Yeah, so we kind of already hinted around about this one, right? And talked about it maybe having some similarities with the adapter pattern. So let's go over first, the book definition for this thing, right? An object that provides a simplified interface to a larger body of code. So this is why, Alan, when you started to talk about your example of, this thing might, your adapter might be making calls into making several calls into that object, and kind of trying to hide some of that, abstract some of that away from you. That's why I was like, let's kind of, tread carefully there, right? Because that's the whole point of the facade pattern, is to take those complicated interfaces and to simplify them. So if in your FLAC example you mentioned like an unzip feature that had to happen, and Joe mentioned that it has to do a call to convert to MP3 before it can play, right? Like all of those complicated calls, obviously we're making those up, but those might be brought into a simpler interface that's just play, right? So you just have the one method play, and that's really the whole point, the intent of the facade pattern, right? Or if you were to think about it, you could think about it this way too: is that it could provide a unified interface to a set of interfaces, act as a wrapper to those. And again, in this term, and in the way that I'm using interface here, I'm not necessarily referring to the programming interface as in, I is for interface, the type of interface, but maybe a more generic, usage of the word, right?
So I have a question for you.
All right.
I'm trying to think of an example where I've seen something like this, and I'm thinking of basically FTPing. Like if you were to FTP via command line, you're gonna open connection, CD to directory, copy file, stuff like that. But if I were to want to simplify that process, I might write a facade that's kind of catered towards or tailored towards like copying a file somewhere. And then I might say facade.copy file, and it's still going to do all the stuff in the background. But to callers of that code, I don't have to kind of copy and paste all those lines to do, similar tasks.
Yeah. I mean, that's one example. So like, let's say like when you would want to use this, right, is you have some complex set of calls or maybe an API, a third-party API, and you want to reduce that down to a much more simpler set of calls that has to happen, right? So, I was trying to think back, and originally when I was trying to put my notes together for the show on this, like I couldn't come up with like any concrete examples of like, I know I've done this, but God, it feels like it's been so long. Because I could certainly remember like, taking old C APIs that, third-party C APIs that I'd be given, and I would want to have those in maybe a C++ kind of framework. So I would want to group those together logically into classes, and then that way it would just be these simple, easy objects that I could call, and those objects would do all the complicated, steps that might be necessary to happen. But then, as I was thinking about it later, I was like, well, there's definitely some examples where maybe if you're working with a third-party vendor for like payment systems, as an example, and you want to take their APIs and reduce that down into a much simpler format that you can call. So maybe you're not going to use every feature under the sun that third party offers, but the ones that you are going to use, you want to have it in a reproducible format, right? And so you might reduce that down into one method that's pay, and you pass in an amount or something like that, right? Versus the 15 calls that you have to make ahead of that in order to set up the secure connection between you and that third-party payment system, and keep that token, and then tell it what you're about to send and all that. Like, have all that hidden away in one simple method, as an example, right?
Yeah, you just saying that reminds me a lot of dealing with the AWS API. The first thing you do is you use a factory to create an object. You pass it your credentials. You use that object to create a request. You process the request, and you get an object back that represents the request, and you kind of check and see when that's done. And a lot of times, if you're just putting a file up in, say, S3, then you might write, like a singleton class, put in S3, and it just kind of does it and returns true or false.
Yeah, it's like a wrapper for everything, right? I mean,
it definitely is a wrapper. I mean, that's a good way to consider it.
I mean, we've all worked in order systems where I definitely remember seeing code where it'd be like, okay, here's the order placed. All right, and then it would go and it would reduce the inventory. And then it would go and try and allocate payments. And then it would go and try and do other things. And instead of having a single wrapper that was, hey, order placed, that would then go do all these things, there was an API, it would literally step through and do that kind of code, right? And that's where like a facade pattern's awesome. Hey, go do this, determine the taxes, do all this, and it does it all for you, and then it's done. And then anything that needs to leverage that same API, whether it be, I don't know, some other system that you have on site or off site, can call into this one simple call, as opposed to having to have this intimate knowledge about your internal structure of your app.
Yeah, it keeps you nice and dry.
Yeah,
and I actually was thinking of specifically, of the PayPal API. If anybody who's done any kind of e-commerce and you've worked with PayPal, you can know that API can be really has some gross parts to it.
Yeah, it's a beast.
If you can take all of that complication and reduce it into one class that has just simpler, easier to understand entry points for the rest of your application, that's a facade.
Yep.
Right? So specifically, going back to the adapter conversation, it then brought up this interesting take about like, okay, well, let's talk about facade versus adapter, right? Like, what's the difference between these two? When would you use one versus the other, right? So an adapter pattern, you would typically already have an existing interface that you're trying to get other systems to act like, right? Whereas with a facade pattern, you don't have that. This is something brand new that you're going to create from scratch, right?
That's a really good distinction.
So this facade, you're defining a new pattern. And an adapter, and I think I might have said this before, or you did, Alan, but you're trying to make two or more things look similar and act similar to each other, right? So, whereas with the facade pattern, you're not trying to necessarily make it look similar to anything. You're just trying to make it easier to use, right? They're both wrappers in a sense, right? But the facade pattern is trying to wrap maybe multiple objects or multiple system calls or API calls or multiple calls into a much more simple and easy to use call, whereas an adapter is trying to wrap each adapter is trying to wrap a single object, right?
Maybe. I don't know if single object, but definitely just trying to do similar functionality, right?
Well, there might be a FLAC wrapper, there might be an MP3 wrapper,
right?
There might be a wave wrapper. But the point is that like each one of those, I'm sorry, I kept saying a wrapper, but I'm an adapter. So a FLAC adapter or an MP3 adapter. So each one of those is wrapping the specific type ultimately, but they're providing a common interface to it, right?
Right.
And that's the whole point of the adapter, is it's trying to solve the problem of, hey, I have these multiple interfaces, whether they be objects or actual type interfaces, or whether they be API calls, but I have these multiple things, these multiple interfaces, and they're all distinct, but I want to make them compatible amongst them. That's what the adapter is trying to do, right? But the facade pattern is simply trying to take all of this complication and put it into easier bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, to hide the implementation, basically.
So I guess you were referring to facade as hiding the ugly earlier,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean,
ugly, man.
A lot of times that's what it's used for, right? Is to hide the internals. It may or may not be ugly. It could be the most beautiful code in the world, but it was 20 different calls, and now you want to make it
I'm sure
one.
if you've seen PayPal, it's got to be pretty.
So
then I went on this hunt, because then I was curious. I was like, well, where is this thing used? Like, is there an example already inside of .NET, right, where this thing is being used? And so I did some searching around, did some Googling, and one comment that came back that I thought, oh, well, that's probably an interesting case, was system.net.web client, right? And going back to Joe's FTP example, right, I thought, oh, that's probably a pretty good example, right? Like the protocol, if you think of the protocol there as the interface, then all that has been abstracted away from you now. All of that ugliness has been abstracted away from you, and instead you just have this one, pretty little interface to work with, called the web client.
So no sockets, no DNS, all that stuff is out of your hands.
right.
Exactly. And so then I got to thinking, like, well, okay, well, I wonder if maybe outside of .NET, like maybe, well, but still within .NET, but not baked into it, maybe something like JSON.NET would count, right? Where you're kind of extracting away like that. What does it take to reconstitute these JavaScript objects, or to go from one to the other, right? Like, you just know of these simple, J objects, for example, right?
Right.
But then I started going a little bit crazy when I was thinking about, like, well, okay, well, where does the facade pattern madness end, right? Because if we're going back outside of .NET, right, then it was like, well, we were talking about React.js earlier, and I was like, well, could you count that as a way to, as a facade, because then you don't have to deal with the DOM, right?
That's
like,
probably that's probably exactly what it is.
It's doing things for you, right? Like, it's abstracting away things for you. But then I got into this question where it was like, okay, wait a minute. If the facade pattern aims to make complex systems or interface simpler, okay, by wrapping them in an easier interface, would that then make, like, all NuGet packages, all JavaScript frameworks, like every new package or framework that you've heard of, be it for whatever language, does that then make that a facade pattern?
They most certainly contain them, right?
But the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that, like, every framework that comes out, right, like any any JavaScript package, any NuGet package that you're going to use, the whole point of that thing, right, is to take something else and make it easier to use.
Yep.
Right?
So the facade is basically a good example of abstraction, right? And so, all these frameworks, even a function, it's abstracting away what's done inside, and all you see are inputs and outputs, right? So I think specifically this pattern is talking about having a class to represent a system of actions. So I think it's a little bit smaller, but I think things like frameworks and stuff like that are definitely very similar. And you could argue that philosophically they're the same.
Exactly.
Well, yeah,
exactly.
They're similar in what they're trying to accomplish, except I think Joe mentioned this previously, is when you look at a framework, it's a system of all these things put together of different patterns, right? That compose the entire framework. Like, so yes, they all try to address a similar type need of either simplifying or streamlining something, but it's a collection of all these patterns and practices that make the entire framework.
Right. So I was just throwing that out there as a thought, because like everything, most of what you're going to read, like you're not going to find anything that's going to say like, hey, every package is a facade pattern, right? But it definitely started to, as you start reading into it, you start like expanding, like, well, wait a minute, because if I take away the definition of it just being the one object or the one entry point, and then say, well, what if this JSON.net or React.js, like if that counts, then that's where it was like, okay, wait a minute, I think I'm going too far here, right? Like
turtles all the way down.
Yeah. So that's the facade pattern.
Yeah, my mind's kind of blown right now. I feel very small. So one of those posters with the universe and the arrow, and you're like, you're here, you're nothing.
You got to make it bigger, man. You gotta build it up.
Yeah. So we just talked about two of our favorite patterns. Now I wanted to talk about one that I'm sort of lukewarm on, which is the Memento Pattern. And the reason I'm lukewarm,
I've seen that movie.
Yeah, it's a much better movie than it is a pattern. I actually thought that the Memento Pattern was something else before I started looking into it, and realized what I was really thinking was more like the command pattern, which we'll probably mention sometime in the future and go into depth. But the Memento Pattern is aimed specifically at rollbacks. So like a real world example would be something like you're about to make some changes to a database and you take a full backup first, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. If something goes, sideways, you can restore that full backup. And it's very important to know that it's a full backup, because you're taking a snapshot of the entire internal state of this thing, and you're able to return and restore to this full internal state. And that doesn't work so well for something like, say, undo in Microsoft Word, where you want to be able to kind of Control Z and Control Shift Z, or Control Y to go backwards and forwards in time, because you'd be saving a full snapshot of this document at every turn, and it just doesn't work out very well. But the command pattern is designed specifically for that purpose, and so it's better for that.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I don't think I've ever seen this particular pattern, so I'm curious as to what you say the implementation details of this are. Yeah,
sure. So just to give you kind of like a more codey example, one thing you might do is you would have an object, we'll say car, and you want a method called, got the name here, save to Memento. So you would say car.save to Memento, and it would give you, we'll say, just for the purpose of demonstration, a JSON object contains all the data, like 100% of the internal structure of that object, all those internal, all those private, all those public variables.
So 100%. A deep copy.
Yeah, deep copy, everything you need to know about that car. And what that means is I can say, hey, car, save to Memento. It gives me an object. I can start making some changes. I can take the tires off. And if I run into some sort of problem, I can say, oh crap, I don't have the right kind of tires, or I'm not going to be able to finish this job. Let's just go ahead and undo. And so you roll back the complete state. You roll back to that memento.
So when you say you roll back, does that mean that it's going to keep track of everything you do, or do you just keep a copy of that car in another variable somewhere?
Yes, you keep a copy. So like if you were doing something more along the lines of the command pattern, you would keep track of what you do along the way, and you would know how to undo each step. And so you're only saving a minimum of information for each thing you do. But the Memento pattern is very dumb. It just takes like basically a dehydrated object, it takes a copy, a picture of your object. And if things go south, it can restore it. So like a good example of this, another kind of real world example is like a database transaction. You say start transaction, you do some stuff. If something goes badly, you can roll back and you go back to the state before that transaction began.
Well, I was thinking of a different example.
Yeah?
Yeah, like a get reset hard.
Oh, there you go.
That's actually probably right along the lines of it.
Yep.
Because it has the previous state and it goes straight back to it. Except I guess the difference would be, it sounds like the way that this is implemented in code is this is like a live memory type thing that's there, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the get reset hard is like an actual example. I was just trying to
right.
You're slipping get back in there. We understand.
Well, there's a lot of reasons to do that, but I was just trying to make I was trying to make it more tangible, right?
And it makes
There's
sense.
another example, like a tangible way to think about this thing too, that I was thinking about was like system restore points.
Oh yeah.
On your for Windows users, right?
Yep. VM snapshots are another great example.
Interesting. So it's like you said, it's pretty heavy-handed.
Yep.
It's not all that efficient, but it's a brute force way of just getting back to the previous state.
Yep.
Well, yeah, because this thing is all in memory though too. Like Joe said, like these are deep copies, so depending on your usage of this thing, this could be some heavy memory usage.
Yeah,
Yep.
it could be.
Yeah, it absolutely needs to be everything that's needed to restore that object to 100% of its original state. So it's not necessarily that you need to save. You don't need to necessarily serialize all of the internal data as long as it's derived, or you kind of put those pieces back together when you restore to that memento. So I think this pattern is interesting for a couple other reasons, though. The way it works, I thought was pretty interesting. This is kind of the way I thought about it, and then after I read about it, it was kind of a little bit different. And so there's really 3 objects involved, and they're poorly named, so sorry. But the first is the originator, and that's your real object. That's the object that you want to be able to create a memento of. And I just said the second object, the memento, is actually an object that represents the state. So really, the JSON example I gave above wasn't so great because the JSON, it's not really an object. It's like it's serialized. It's a little bit different. The object should actually be something that's completely immutable.
You almost want to think of it like like where I thought you were going to go with this was like Inception, though, where like the saved copy is another originator object.
Oh yeah, so that would get into like kind of prototype territory, right? Which is something we kind of talked about, where you could kind of clone things and change them a little bit, And that's what I think is kind of interesting about this. So it's got really firm rules around how to do this, and basically the originators got 2 methods, and that's save to memento and restore to memento, and I should say 2 additional methods. Because in a clear violation of the single responsibility pattern, we do want our object that actually does the work and does the stuff to be able to save its own internal state and restore from its own internal state, which I thought was interesting. Initially when I was reading about this, I thought that there was going to be another class around that was in charge of knowing how to kind of serialize and deserialize these objects. But that's not the case, and they specifically wanted these objects to know how to put themselves back together because...
Well, yeah, I'm trying to figure out like why you think that would be a violation, because how would something else know the internal state?
So if it's just a dumb like POCO or data transfer object, a DTO, then it's only really going to have public properties, and it doesn't even matter. Like there's no real reason to to do a deep copy of that because it's all right there at face value. But if you did do this on some sort of real class that had methods for doing things, then not only is your class responsible for doing those things, it now also knows how to export and import itself. So
I guess the example I'm thinking of, like if I'm thinking of a complicated object type, right? I'm thinking of like a data table, right? Where it might not expose, but it'll know. Where it is in the reading process, like it might know a total count. Well, it'll expose a total count, but I guess that was the class though that I was thinking of is like there's going to be a lot of internal state there that it's not going to necessarily expose publicly.
Right. Yeah, so like one example might be
in order to reconstitute itself.
Right. So, in like real simple examples, you could actually just kind of, base 64, encode your data, or literally just, take the binary for that object and write it to disk or something. But another example that was kind of fun is, you guys remember Mega Man?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when you would save your game, they would give you a little code, which was like a grid with little pictures in it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that right there. That's an example of the memento pattern where they give you something that represents the state of the game, and you type it back in at some later date, and it's able to recreate the state of that game perfectly.
That was an incredibly hard game, by the way.
Just got to play for thousands of hours.
You really did, man. You couldn't beat that game. It was impossible.
Had to memorize.
Oh, actually, Call of Duty was, speaking of gaming, one of the things that we got some feedback on. Like, we should definitely include an episode on Call of Duty.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Nice. And so I did want to mention the third object, which is involved in this pattern. So the first was the originator. It's the real thing. Memento is the internal state. The third is called another terrible name, the caretaker. And the caretaker is the person who's or the class who's actually in charge of doing that rolling back and doing that stuff. And what I thought was kind of interesting there is that there's pretty much no example of this, at least no abstract example. It's all pretty much you kind of save the memento and then you do some stuff, and if you need to, you can roll back the memento.
So the caretaker's not
actually,
used?
if you were to pull up the Wikipedia article for this pattern, it doesn't mention a caretaker.
Yep.
Type.
So it's a strictly by the book. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if most people just leave that out of their examples.
Huh.
Yeah, but just for fun, I wanted to kind of think of some weirdo tips because I was trying to think of examples that were like Dart.net or just well-known examples where this might exist, and so I kind of thought of some weird scenarios that aren't quite right, but like one was the undo and redo history. You know, that's not a great example here because we've got such a heavy export. You don't want to save a full copy of your Word document every time you bold something.
Right.
Also, we mentioned a little bit. If instead of having that restore to memento function return void, if we actually returned an object, then you'd almost have a factory. So you'd be able to kind of like pump in this internal state and get out objects, which is interesting. But that does mean that factor, or what's acting as a factory, has to know how to create internal states of the objects it's producing. So it's a little gross. And what I like about thinking through that is I feel like I'm kind of learning from the masters in a way. I'm looking at this pattern, and even though I don't like it much, I'm starting to understand why I think they made some of these decisions. And so I thought that was pretty cool. There's also an example of sending between different systems, which is kind of interesting if you're doing some sort of, if you can export a blob or something and send it to some other system that knows how to put it together, even if you're using a shared library, then that's pretty cool. And kind of along the same lines of cloning, C#, it's got the cool generics, so you can do some pretty cool stuff with generics to kind of generify this. But when you do that, you're kind of losing some of the benefit because you either have to know about the internal privates of these objects, or their internal state doesn't matter very much. So then why are you really doing this? So. And I wanted to mention also why you don't really see this pattern very much, which is kind of the main use case in software is transactions. And that kind of stuff is usually held, is already taken care of for you by wherever you're doing those transactions. So, and command pattern is just better for most things.
I'd never even heard of Memento before you said you were going to do it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And that's why.
It kind of reminds me of, like, thinking of just another, like, real-world use of it is if you've ever used the protocol buffers, Google protocol buffers. It's like, think of JSON, except if it were better.
JSON is awesome. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, okay. So, I say that jokingly, though. But, like, JSON is all human readable, right? And so, by very definition, then that means that there's waste there, right?
Yeah.
Whereas protocol buffers solves the problem. It's solving a similar problem, but it's doing it in binary.
And it would compress things
form.
too, wouldn't it?
But what I don't remember is, it's definitely a compressed version of what you get.
Yeah, which is hard to
what
do
you
for
started
streaming type stuff. So that's interesting because it doesn't know where the end is. So,
but what I don't recall, it's been a while since I've used the protocol buffers, is does it save the state for like private? Did it have access? I can't remember if you were setting up access to the things that needed to be saved in the protocol buffer. I'm pretty sure that you did. Yeah, I don't know. I have to go back and look at that. But that's one example I was thinking about.
I've never seen the protocol buffers before. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they are amazing.
Yeah, we're gonna have to leave this in the show notes.
They're definitely definitely a much smaller way. So like if you wanted to serialize your objects, and you wanted to serialize a lot of them, and you wanted to do it in as little space as possible, then that's where JSON starts to break down, right? Because it's such because it is human readable, you're going to have a lot of waste there, right? Whereas with protocol buffers, it's just garbage. Is what it's going to look like. So,
yeah, that's really cool. We'll definitely leave a link in the show notes for this.
Yeah, definitely. Also, just to recap, I guess it's not really an also, to recap, we talked about adapters, facades, and mementos, and also, I don't think we really called it out, but we've got like 3 other shows spotlighting other design patterns. So if you're just listening now, go back and check those out. I know the first one is at 11, but there are 2 more in there somewhere.
Yep. And we'll leave links in the show notes for those as well. And then, yeah, resources we like. The first and foremost for probably every episode is the internet. If you haven't been there, you should check it out.
We were putting the show notes together. I felt like that was relevant. I don't know. It's definitely one of my favorite resources. So if you haven't used it yet, it's interesting that you're listening. So you can probably thank a friend for letting you listen to the show.
Yes.
And you should check it out.
Yep. And there's also the Gang of 4 book, which we've mentioned many times, but that's kind of where a lot of this stuff comes from originally, including some of the stuff that's kind of outdated. And I actually just threw another link in here. You guys familiar with the Codeless Code?
No.
I'm sure you've seen it before on like Reddit or Hacker News, whatever, but it's not really design pattern specific, but it's it'll have these kind of like fake scenarios with like Buddhist monk temples, and they'll illustrate some sort of like programming principle using some sort of like funny story about the monk cracking the egg or something.
I've never seen nor heard of this.
Oh, you are in for a treat then. You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I probably just lost hours.
Yeah, I think they have some sort of rating, so definitely start with the higher ranked ones.
All right, cool. So Joe, what's your tip of the week?
Well, I was talking about other editors that I won't name. I've finally gotten back into reinstalling some of the packages that I used to use for Sublime. I've been lazy when setting up other computers. But one that I finally reinstalled the other day was Code Formatter, which actually, I guess it provides a nice facade, probably using some adapters for other plugins.
You said facade. It's got to be a facade pattern.
Yeah.
I heard you say the words.
So there's actually a bunch of different formatters. So you can go and you can get the package for JSON formatting or PHP formatting or HTML, or you can get the Code Formatter package, which bundles all of those up. And you can just say kind of, I think I did like Control-Alt-F for my hotkey. I can open up a file, do Control-Alt-F, and it's going to format my SQL for me or my XML or whatever it is. So I don't have to go use an online formatter.
Oh, dude, that's beautiful. I'm downloading that.
Yup.
Because I did exactly what you said. I've got like 3 or 4 different formatters installed. This is excellent.
Yep.
Awesome.
Wait a minute, so it's going to format... Wait, did you say it was specific to the language?
No,
or did it formats
can
them all
handle
the same?
many. It can handle many is what he said.
It abstracts
Yeah, but what I mean, though, is that, like, did you say that it's going to format your C# specific to Microsoft's coding standards and JavaScript to its standard?
I believe so. It's up to the individual formatters that it uses to decide that. But for me, most of the time, if I'm doing that, it's just because I want to see, I got some sort of like, something from like a stack trace or something, and I just want to like dump it in. That's probably a bad example. Or, I get some sort of mangled XML, and I just want to see it properly tabbed so I can read it.
That's awesome. All right, so my tip of the week, simply because I couldn't think of anything else. I need to start writing these things down because they come up all throughout programming and I always forget them. So mine is Slack. if you've got a team of people that you...
Hey, I'm already Slack. I'm already winning.
Yeah, he is a slacker. So, no, seriously, if you haven't used Slack and you do any kind of communication, like a lot of us were using Google Hangouts, and while they can be awesome, there's some things that are frustrating. Like, you can't boot somebody out of a Hangout. So, if somebody needs to be gone from your Hangout, if they don't choose to leave, then...
Why are you looking at me?
then you can't get rid of them. But with Slack, not only is it an excellent chat platform, but it's got a ton of plugins to it that make it both useful and fun for working with a group of people. Like, you don't want to be getting on the phone all day with them. You just want to shoot over a quick message. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's a very nice platform. There's a reason why they are growing like crazy.
Yep, /Jiffy. That's why.
Giphy, come on.
So the deal is you type in /Giphy and then some sort of phrase, and then they will try to find an appropriate GIF that matches that. So you can say like /Giphy lol, and it'll get a picture of somebody laughing really loud, a little animated GIF.
Sometimes it comes up with some really interesting and odd photos or GIFs. And they're usually animated GIFs. Like, there's some pretty entertaining stuff. I mean, we've definitely blown out our bandwidth.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's more of a tip of the week for the company and instead of the individual.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, if you don't already have a good chat platform, this is an excellent one.
Yeah, we need to get a Coding Blocks Slack going. Maybe they'll sponsor us and we can just kind of keep it running.
Ooh, that would be fun. Maybe we could even invite others. Yeah.
So I did write down my tip of the week.
Thanks.
I'll get the knife out later. So we were talking about Atom and code earlier, and so I found this the keyboard shortcut cheat sheet for the two editors, and so we'll throw a link up to that in the show notes. But it's a pretty good list of all the different keyboard shortcuts. Assuming that you're a keyboard junkie, which I would imagine most every developer I've met, majority of them are, except when it comes to Git, which is weird.
Because Git is weird.
It
is.
It's like you're making fun of his girlfriend, man. That's just wrong.
Wow. Why do we have to make it weird?
Your girlfriend is nonsensical. I'm sorry.
Oh, man.
She has weird flags.
All right, before we go any further with that joke, let's just go ahead and wrap this show up and say that, in summary, we've discussed the adapter, the facade, and the Memento pattern. And what else you want to add to that? Go to the internet.
Yeah, use the internet. It's good for you.
Yep, and we know who Outlaw is voting for president.
Yes. This has been a very fruitful show.
All right, so with that, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app. And if you haven't already, we've said it before, we'll say it again, please go on to iTunes or Stitcher and leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it.
Yep, and contact us with any questions or topics. Head over to www.codingblocks.net, and there's a contact link up there at the top of the page. And leave your name, and if you want to be mentioned on the show, we'll be happy to do it. And also visit us at www.codingblocks.net, where you'll find the show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments@codingblocks.net, and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah,
I think he was just using Slack. Was he being Slack? Is that what you were talking about?
He was. I think he was asleep, actually. I'm not really
thinking about pizza.
Oh, you're just now eating? Oh, man, you got to be hungry. And that pizza's cold.
No, man, this is like the other side of things when you're like, whoa, why did I eat that pizza? Oh, man, I'm old now, man. I think about pizza very differently. We have a very different relationship now.
That's excellent. All right, guys, that's episode 30. It's a wrap.
Peace.